What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Fighting Game Tutorial Series, we're going to be going over searching for online sessions. So I have two standalone sessions here that are starting up. They're going through my splash screens. And once I come into the game here, I will be able to host a session on one of these and join or search to join on the other. There's going to be text that displays to the screen that explains how many sessions we've found once the search is finished. This is better to do as standalone instead of new editor window, because if you do it in new editor window, then it counts as one session, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. So I'm going to go to online, and I'm going to join, and you're going to see that no sessions are found when the search starts, and when the search completes, there are still 0 sessions found because I haven't hosted one yet. Now, if we are to go to the other instance and go to online and host, you'll see that the session was properly created. The text says it right here. Now if we try and join again, it says no sessions found when we're searching to start. Then when it completes, it updates and says that 1 session was found, which is exactly what it should be since we have 1 session hosting a game. So we were able to successfully determine how many sessions we were able to find, and that is our goal for today's episode. This will allow us to eventually join these sessions, but before we can join, we have to know what sessions we have access to and which sessions are visible. That way we can begin the join process. Alright, so now we can go and change this to the new editor window, and if we launch, you'll see that we get 2 different windows, and I can resize them to be the proper size. Something like this will work. Now you'll notice what I do in one version, the other instance also gets it. So if I host a match, the text is printing to both of the instances. See, as I press join, it prints on both of them. So this really only counts as one instance, so you can't join a match that you're hosting from that instance. And also, every time you hit host, it's trying to host for both instances, and when you hit join, it's trying to join for both instances. There are technically ways around this, but it is much easier to just use the standalone game as opposed to the new editor window when testing out this searching for sessions logic. Before we get started on this fun online journey, if you'd like to get caught up in the series and check out everything we've done to get to this point in the fighting game tutorial, you might want to check out this playlist in the top right corner right here, which will show you every single mechanic we've covered throughout the last 185 episodes. We still have a long way to go, but we're making progress every week, and I'm very excited to show some more. Alternatively, if you don't care about the entire playlist, but you do care about finding online sessions, I'll link you to this icon in the top right corner right here, which is where we cover hosting sessions and creating sessions. That is, of course, the first part. Before we can search or find any sessions, we have to have a session available to us, and that is what we covered in the Create Session video. I also want to give a huge thank you to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I'm incredibly grateful and so happy that you guys are excited about what we're coming out with in this series. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. Now, I recommend for testing today that you do use standalone, as I was mentioning earlier. So, standalone game with number of players set to 2. There are different methods of testing online play, and you can feel free to change them in advanced settings and play around with all the options in here if you'd like. But for me, just having standalone as my game mode and number of players to 2, that will do everything we need as far as testing goes, and I think it's the easiest to change back and forth, which is really helpful for me because I still want to use the new editor window when I'm running just single player. Now, with that done, we can go into the code, which is where almost all of our logic is going to be today. Once we get into our code, we want to go to the base game instance.h, the same place that we made our host session function. And before we do anything in here, we want to add an include to the .h file. This is actually an include we had in the previous episode in the .cpp file, interfaces/online session interface.h. But we are going to need it in the .h file. And when you use an include in the .h file, you don't also need to include it in the .cpp file. So even though we only needed it in the C++ file in the previous episode, I am going to move that over. Let's do that before anything else because these variables we're going to create for today's episode do require this. So I've taken my bottom include that I have, cut it out of the .cpp, gone to the .h, and pasted it in here. Now make sure it goes above your .generated.h file. That should always be at the bottom when you're working with C++ in Unreal Engine. But otherwise it doesn't really matter where you put this. So you can see I have it there. I don't have it in the .cpp file, and everything is going to work perfectly fine. Now that we've made that small change, we can add some variables that we are going to use for today's episode for searching. So let's scroll down to our functions and variables, and the very first thing we're going to add is a search for sessions function. Similarly to the host session function we had in the previous episode, I have a blueprint callable function called search for sessions, and basically when we press that join button on the main menu, we're going to call this function. So make sure this new function you're making is ufunction blueprint callable. That way we can call it when pressing the join button on the main menu. And you can call this whatever you'd like. Search for sessions is a good one. It's not really joining the session. We have to find all the sessions first before we can actually join one. So I know the main menu button says join. Technically when you join, you are searching first. Now this is the main function that's going to do our logic today, but there are a few other things we need. And one really important one is another function called search for sessions completed. So I have void search for sessions completed that has a boolean search completed. This function is very important because the search operation takes time. It may take 1 second, may take 5 seconds, 20, 2 minutes, however long it takes time to actually find these results. And so as soon as we start searching, we can't just automatically assume that we have found all available sessions. It doesn't work like that. We find the sessions gradually as the search continues. So we need a way to know when the search was completed, and then we will return the number of sessions and we'll have more data at that point. But we do need another function to know when the search for sessions has completed. And it needs a boolean search completed, not just because I'm saying it in this video, but actually because we are going to do something to bind this function to a delegate. And a delegate is essentially when something happens, do this other thing. You've seen this before, whether you realized it or not. So in setTimer, if you've seen the setTimer functions in Blueprint or even in the code, when we set a timer, we are telling the timer to call another function once that timer is done. That's really what's going on here. The processes are slightly different, of course, but really it's the same thing. We are saying we're going to start the search. When the search finishes, then we're going to call this search for sessions completed. And in this case, we are actually going to use Unreal's methods. Unreal has delegates for things like onFindSessionComplete delegate. This is not a type that I made. This is an Unreal type. This delegate does expect you have a true or false to say if it was successful or not. And so this function that we are making for when the search completes does need this boolean. You can call the boolean whatever you want, like I called it search completed, but you do need to have a boolean parameter. So make sure you're not forgetting that, otherwise you will run into build errors later on. Now for the actual delegate itself, there is this huge type name that we have here called onFindSessionCompleteDelegate. Again, this is an Unreal type. You can call this delegate whatever you want. So I called mine search for sessions completed delegate. This delegate is basically just going to be a UObject that we create to store data. We can use a handle to start listening and stop listening or clean up any data, just like we do with the timer. So we have the actual delegate here, and below it I have another variable that is the handle, so fDelegate handle. Now this might be a little bit more familiar because when we had used fTimer earlier in the series, we were using fTimer handle, and the handle was what was really starting the timer, stopping or clearing the timer. It's the same deal here. This delegate is going to know what it is bound to, what function to call when it is told to do so. But the handle is a generic delegate handle, and it will tell the specific delegate that we tell it to listen or stop listening or fire or don't fire, because we are going to track it the same way we do with timers in the code. And it's okay if that doesn't make sense. I'm going to explain it when we go in there. But just as a comparison, delegates are very similar to timers, or if you see set timer by event in the blueprint, that's really the same thing. You're letting a timer go off, and once the timer finishes, then it calls that event. That event is the delegate. Or rather, it's the function the delegate is bound to. It does the delegate logic in the background, but that really is the same process as what we're doing here. So this is an F delegate handle, and I've called it search for sessions completed handle. Now there's one more thing we need for today's episode, and that is our search settings. So in the previous episode, in the host session function, we had created a session settings variable, and we made all of our parameters for the session in there. We're doing the same thing for the search variables, but we need to not only define it when searching, but also return data to it so that when the search is finished, it knows how many results were found, or how long it took to perform that search, or what the name is of the sessions it found. And so we need this data to be more than just a local variable for that function, but we need to actually store that data. So we're going to make a T shared pointer of F online session search, and I've called it search settings. Now these variables are the reason that we needed this interfaces / online session interface.h include in here. Just so you all are aware, that's where that include comes into play. These three variables and these two functions are all we need for today's episode. So let's go into our base game instance.cpp, and let's scroll back up to the top, and let's go to the constructor. Now the first thing we need to do in here is actually bind our delegate to the function that we want to call when the delegate is fired. So remember, what we're really trying to do here is wait for the search to complete, and when the search completes, we want to call our search for sessions completed function that we set up. So we're going to take our delegate here, search for sessions completed delegate, and we're going to set it equal to the variable type of the delegate. Okay, so search for sessions completed delegate is an F on find sessions complete delegate. We need to use F on find sessions complete delegate : create U object, and this create U object looks for the object we are calling it on, which in this case is the game instance, and then also the function that we want to call. This is the same way we do things for our player controller. So if we take a quick look at our base player controller.cpp and our setup input component function, you see that we use these function calls where we're grabbing the class type, a base player controller : call jump. It's the same process here. You could call a function from a different class, and so we do need to know where we're calling it. We do need to be specific about that, and so we're going to say u base game instance : search for sessions completed. Notice the ampersand in the front here as well. That is part of the syntax, so don't forget that or it won't work. Now this variable is going to know that once we start listening for on find sessions complete, once the Unreal behavior triggers and says, yep, we've completed the search, then this delegate will know to call this function. It's still okay if this doesn't make sense just yet. You're going to see more of this as we get into the two functions that we're going to write. But just know we're binding our delegate variable to call the search for sessions completed function once the search actually finishes. Now let's scroll down to our host session function. And luckily we don't have to change anything in here today if you don't want to. I have added a few additional logs, 2 logs, that say the same thing the UE logs say. And the reason I did that is because the UE logs are a little bit harder to access when you're running standalone. So if you print the text to the screen like I did, you can see it while testing if your logic is working as expected. So this is not required at all, but I believe it will make your life easier. I basically just took whatever was being printed from the UE log and added it to an on-screen debug message function call. And it's pretty simple. Basically, you can call it gengine arrow add on-screen debug message, Then you have the index or the key. This is the order the message will show up. So I put it at 0 so that it will always be in the 0 position, which will overwrite any other messages on the 0 position. If you set this value to -1, it will print like the UE log where they print over top of each other. So when one comes in, the other ones get moved down and it's at the top. I actually didn't want that here. I wanted the messages to be overwritten. So I kept it as 0. I think that's the cleanest in this case, so you can see exactly what's going on. The second parameter is the duration. I left it up for 30 seconds if another log doesn't come in and bump it out. Then you can actually pick a color. I picked cyan because I thought it was a nice color. Really nothing else to it. But you just do F color, : : and then you'll get a list. So you can pick whatever you want. You have emerald, magenta, all sorts of different ones. Then we have our actual text, although the add on-screen debug message does actually take in a constant F string instead of just that text parameter, so it's a little bit more difficult to format than just writing text and then your parentheses, but it's still very simple. You just put F string : : print F, parenthesis, text, parenthesis, then you put your actual text that you're interested in, and just make sure you have the correct amount of parentheses at the end as well. And so I copied the text from my UE logs and just pasted them in this text field. You don't need both of these. I'd recommend that you just have them for testing purposes, and you can either comment them out when you're done with them, or you could actually remove the lines. For now, I'm going to keep them both, again, just for testing purposes, but it's up to you what you want to do. Now, I've done the same thing for the else. So if it fails to create a session, it will print a session has failed to be created. But you can see all my parameters in the function are exactly the same, other than that text field. Now, one additional change I made in here that is not required at all is I made these settings alphabetical. There were only 2 that were out of order. I believe it was the should advertise and the uses presence. So I just went ahead and moved them to the end. It's not required at all, but it was kind of bugging me that they weren't in alphabetical order. So there we go. All right, now onto the logic for today's episode, and that is our search for sessions function. So go ahead and write this function, void ubase game instance : : search for sessions, and we need to do the same thing that we were doing in our host session. So as I kept saying last time, this is right from the Unreal documentation, and this is how you can grab their online subsystem and the online session interface, which are 2 types that Unreal has that we're going to need access to. So I'm checking to see if we can obtain the online subsystem by using online subsystem : : get. So basically, as long as an online subsystem exists, whether it be Steam, Xbox, the default Epic Unreal subsystem, whatever it is, as long as one exists, we should be able to obtain it through this method. And we'll get the online subsystem variable when that succeeds. Now, if it succeeds, we'll go inside this if statement, and then we want to make sure we can grab the online session interface as well, which you can get by using online session pointer, the name of your variable, which I've called online session interface, and I've set it equal to the online subsystem get session interface. Again, we don't have to write this function. This is Unreal's behavior, so this should work as long as our online subsystem exists and the session interface didn't fail to be created in any way. Now we will have an online session interface variable that we can use. Once we get our online session interface, we can actually tell our delegate to start listening to the find session completion. And we will allow the handle to be equal to that result, so we can either clear it or stop it if we need to for any reason. So this is where we really start listening for the completion of the search operation. So we're going to use our search for sessions completed handle and set it equal to online session interface arrow add on find sessions complete delegate _ handle. This is an Unreal function, again, not one that we wrote. And then you're going to pass in the delegate. So we have our delegate listening, and now we're going to make our search settings. Right now, these are generic, just like in the host session function. So coming from Unreal's documentation, you have a few different variables you can set for your search here. And I'm going to cover the main ones, just like we did in host session. So we have our search settings variable. This is what we made in the base game instance.h right here. And similarly to host session, we need to actually instantiate the pointer, and you do that by calling make shareable and then the type. So scrolling back up to host session, we were creating the t-shared pointer f online session settings, calling it session settings, and setting it equal to make shareable new online session settings. This is very similar, but we already have the variable defined in the .h file, so we just need to use search settings and set it equal to make shareable new f online session search, not the same as f online session settings. So make sure the types are different. This needs to be f online session search. And once we've instantiated this, we can go ahead and set the variable, set the fields that we want. So we have search settings is LAN query, and it's pretty self-explanatory in this case. And it's just if the search is meant for LAN matches or not. We spoke about LAN a little bit last time, but it's your local area network. And basically it just means there are multiple machines connected to one network. In this case, it is technically true. Really, it's just one machine. But I'm going to leave it as false because for our searching, we probably don't want to default to using LAN. Then we have our max search results. You can set this to whatever you want. I set it to 5 right now. I mean, I'm only ever going to have 1 at the current time until we get into more complicated stuff. But bringing up 5 potential results. If you return 5 results, then you may realize that you need more, so you can increase this value. You have your ping bucket size. The ping bucket size is meant to separate the games with different ping, into different buckets. Useful for matchmaking when you've seen games allow you to search by connection strength. To be completely honest, right now I'm not sure what a good value is without playing with it more, but I put it to 30 just knowing about ping in general. 30 seems pretty reasonable, but this is very subject to change, so I'm just putting a default value in here. You can put in whatever you want. Then we have timeout in seconds, and I've set it to 10.0 F, which is 10 seconds. So basically the search will finish after 10 seconds. It does say that it may not apply to all platforms, so just keep that in mind, but it does apply to the default Epic platform, which is what we're using right now. So 10 seconds will stop the search. Now, after we've set up all of our search settings, we need to actually start searching for sessions, of course. And again, similarly to host session, we need to know the player that is initializing the search, and we can do it using this very simple method coming from the Unreal documentation. So we set up a uLocalPlayer pointer called localPlayer, and we set it equal to getWorld get first local player from controller. So it's basically going to return the first player from the first player controller. So in this case, it's just the hosts, whoever's initiating the search, which is always going to be us. When we only have one account signed in on our game, or just one controller, like when we're on the main menu, it's always going to be the same player. We need this because the find sessions variable we're about to call requires the player's preferred net ID, and it also requires the search settings. So I'm doing an if statement here to make sure that we can search for sessions. So if online session interface finds sessions, we're dereferencing local player to get the preferred unique net ID. Since local player is a pointer, it points to a location in memory, but dereferencing it by putting that asterisk in the front grabs the raw data at that location. We want to use that so we can call the get preferred unique net ID and grab the appropriate value. Again, this is the exact same way we did it in host session above, so nothing's different there. Now, the other parameter in find sessions is the search settings, and it requires it to be a shared reference. Our variable, our search settings variable, is a shared pointer, not a shared reference, but luckily you can easily convert it by using the .toSharedRef function. So we're just going to pass along search settings and then do .toSharedRef parentheses. And that will do exactly what we need. Now, if this succeeds, it will print out this text to the screen. Else, if it fails, it'll print out this text. So if it succeeds, it says search found %d sessions when starting search. And I'm passing along the search settings search results.num. Now, understand, we have this other function that we're going to go over in a second called search for sessions completed. So when we initialize this search, we are not going to find any sessions right away. We just called the function. No sessions should be found this early on. And that's exactly my point of logging this here. You saw earlier during the initial demo I did that we were saying search found 0 sessions when starting search. This is the entire point of that delegate. So we don't find any sessions when we start the search. We find 0. We don't have them yet. So this is always going to return 0. This method of printing it out is fine. It's correct. But this is always going to return 0 because search isn't finished yet. So instead of doing this, if you want, you could simply say search started. Because that makes more sense. But I wanted to prove that point, that you will not be able to have any sessions found this early on. So instead, if you want to write search started, go for it. That is more accurate to what is actually happening there. Now the else was no sessions found while searching. But really, this isn't true either. Again, that was just to prove the point with the delegate. Really, at this point, if this else fires, this means that we weren't able to search. You'll notice that the find sessions return section says true if successful searching for sessions, false otherwise. So we can change the text here to say search unable to start. And we can copy that and paste it here. Again, these are just logs. They're for debugging anyway. I just wanted you to see that so you know what's going on. This is why the delegate is important, because this will always return 0 results if we try and figure out how many sessions are available immediately after calling the function. We instead have to wait for the delegate to call our new function. So remember at the start of this function where we had set up our search for sessions completed handle and we added our delegate to the find session complete delegate. Once the find sessions function completes, it will then tell this delegate to do whatever logic it is that it is set up to do. And in the constructor, we had set it up to call our search for sessions completed function. So now if we scroll down, void ubase game instance : search for sessions completed. And that, of course, takes our boolean search completed in there. Now, with the other two functions related to online, the host session and the regular search for sessions, we have to get our online subsystem and we have to get the online session interface. So same if statements as before. And assuming we are able to obtain both of these things, we can then clear the delegate handle because we no longer want to be listening or trying to wait for find sessions to complete. It's already completed at this point. We're good to clear it out and stop. That way we're not using any resources to try to actually call this function a second time or just leave something hanging waiting for the find sessions function to complete. And to do this, we can use our online session interface again, and we can call clear on find session complete delegate underscore handle. Then you have to pass it the handle, and we want to clear our search for sessions completed handle. So once we do that, the handle will go back to being empty, and we won't be listening for anything else, which is what we want. Now at this point, we can determine how many results were found from the search, how many sessions were found from the search, because the search settings that we made a variable of and we set up in the previous function still exists. It's not a local variable to that function. And now these search settings that were passed into the find sessions function has all of the search results filled out for these sessions that they found. So all we need to do is print out that data and we will know that we found a session. If we find 0, then we know that no sessions were found. But if we find more than 0, we know that at least one session was found. So at this point, it's very simple. I'm just going to add a UE log and an add on-screen debug message, depending on the route you are going. And so I have the same settings as before, but for the text I say search found %d sessions after completing search. Then the parameter I put in is search settings arrow search results.num. And you can see I do the same thing for the UE log. Again, you really only need one of these, but I just put both. Whatever route you want to go is perfectly fine. And at that point, we will be able to launch our game and actually find a session. We can't join it just yet, but we can find the session. We know that it exists, and that is the first step to joining sessions. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for the love and support, and if you'd like to consider donating to the Patreon or YouTube or just using super thanks, I would really appreciate it. Helps keep this series alive and thriving, and I'm really grateful to all of you. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to assist you, and it is completely free. Other than that, guys, that's all I've got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.